Good. All right. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, Friday morning. Another week almost done and dusted. So today we are talking China, and Ed was just saying that he was going to have a go at Lee for bringing up the topic of China. So I'm going to give Ed the go. So Ed, yeah, you're going to have a go at Lee without Lee being here, but love to hear your thoughts on China and why you were going to have a go at Lee.
Well, yeah, she's got a lot to answer for because I disappeared down a huge rabbit hole. Um, I mean, it's such a vast subject, and I suddenly realised I know nothing about China. A huge country I know nothing about. I couldn't name what its sort of what its favourite sport is. I couldn't say what um, its biggest export. I couldn't really say anything about it. And I thought, well, how do you research something when you actually know very little? And I thought, well, okay, I'll focus it down to the UK's relationship with China. Um, and that was quite interesting because what I do know is we're not too happy with China. Um, and it stems from a few things like there's the relationship between China and Hong Kong, which is causing us problems because, of course, Hong Kong used to be a UK protectorate and now it's been given back to China, but they promised to be nice to it and they're not being nice to it. And we're not really holding up our end of the bargain because we're not really pushing against them. And then, of course, I think a lot of people blame China for the coronavirus and the fact that they have wet markets and things. And we're a bit strange in the UK. You can eat animals as long as you don't talk about them being animals. Whereas the Chinese don't mind eating animals that are animals. Um, and then, of course, there's the treatment of the can I say the word, Uyghur Muslims. Um, but then I thought, well, we're never going to do anything about those issues because we are so dependent on China for trade. And we buy a lot more from China than China buys from us. And then I started doing a little bit of digging into the trade relationships between us and China. And it's quite interesting because they have a finger in almost all our infrastructure in the UK. I think about a quarter of all North Sea oil exploration is in Chinese hands. So that's Frank's part of the country, just off his coast. They own Thames Water, one of the largest water companies in the UK. They have ownership of two rail companies. We've got this stupid system of denationalising our railway, and you have to buy 52,000 tickets to get anywhere. And they also own part of Heathrow Airport, which I found quite amazing. And then they insulted us. They really did insult us because we've got this project called HS2, High Speed 2, about getting a train from London to Manchester a bit quicker than it does at the moment. And it's costing us billions and it's going to take 20 years to achieve. And the Chinese said, well, look, if you really want it done, we can do it in 5 months. Which is quite interesting. And then, of course, the other thing I know about China is it's the third most biodiverse country in the world, which is hardly surprising, seeing as the biggest, I think. And the other two countries above it are Brazil and Colombia. But it's interesting, actually, because when I researched on investment, all I could find was inward investment from China. And I know that we invest in China. And eventually I found out that we invest more in China than they invest in us, which is quite interesting. And then, our great friend, W.H. Murray, and he talks about once you get committed, providence moves and all sorts of things fall into place. Well, I've committed to this project about finding out more about China. And last night when I was looking at the news, I was just scrolling through the news on the BBC website on my phone, and I spotted 3 China stories. One was about Biden banning certain firms from doing business with other firms in China because he's worried about them using the technology to spy on him. That wasn't very interesting. The other was that Beijing now has more billionaires than New York. And I thought, oh, I bet Trevor likes that because that's animal farming spades. And I think, depending on which reports you read, China's got more billionaires than America, although others have America slightly in front. But you don't think of China as having billionaires. Well, I don't, anyhow, a communist country. And then the other thing was that China and America used to compete for the top slot in having the biggest supercomputer. But they've been toppled by Japan just recently. And this is where I really started to hate, well, no, I don't hate anyone, dislike Lee, because I disappeared down this huge rabbit hole because I came across this term petaflops. I don't know whether you know what a petaflop is, Ivan. A petaflop, well, peta's quite easy. Well, it's not actually quite easy. It's a quadrillion. But unfortunately, the definition of a quadrillion in the UK, which is one with 24 zeros after it, is different from an American quadrillion, which is one with 15 zeros on it. So I wasn't sure whether a computer petaflop is one or the other. But the flop fascinated me because a flop is a floating point operation. If you don't know what floating points are in mathematics, it's a process whereby you can use the same number to describe a massive thing like the size of the universe and a small thing like the space within an atom. Go figure that one out. But what really, 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 really got me was I spent all night worrying about it. How the hell do you get flop out of floating point operations? I couldn't work out how you got flop out of that because the only way I could do it missed the point. So that's my contribution on China.
Thanks, Ed. Well, I think we all know now a lot more about China than we did when we started off. So yeah, flop. So floating point, FL, and operations, OP. So flop. But where's
the point? Because the FL comes from the floating and the op comes from the op. You've missed the point.
Well, floating point is one word.
No, it's not.
It is if you're a lazy computer programmer. Right, so Tabitha, what did add your thoughts in there?
All right, what I know about China is that, it's leading the race on, okay, am I on? Okay, yeah. It's leading the race on, the fourth industrial revolution. And I have a problem with China in the sense that, it's becoming one of those totalitarian states, because of the whole surveillance thing. It kind of reminds you of, what, the Brave New World, yes, and 1984. I think we are reaching towards, that direction. That's what I know about China. I know that in a couple of years, so I think the economy will be like, the best in the world, And what I say about China is that I think that it makes sense. It actually makes sense that it has more billionaires like, Ed alluded earlier, I'm just a bit concerned about the whole, surveillance thing, because, we don't want to go back to the 20th century, with Mao and, with Stalin and, with Hitler. So I think the whole industrial revolution thing is a bit of a concern to me because, when you think about such things, you think about such movies as I, Robot, they've been teaching us, they've been telling us, I don't know what are my thoughts when it comes to artificial intelligence. I don't know if I should be like wary or if I could actually, accept the whole thing. But my thoughts on China is that they are a rapid economy. You know, they're moving forward, and yes, I think that's just my contribution on China. That's what I know about China. Let me just leave it there.
All right, good. Thanks, thanks, Teresa. Right, Ish. Yeah, you live next door. Well, sort of next door. Yeah, as next door as it can be between two massive countries.
Well, China, I think whatever Tabiso and Ed said, that yes, it's fascinating to see how far they've gone, and it is also a risk to the entire world, because we are giving China the power wherein it can control the economy of the entire world, because 90% of the manufacturing is being done from China. Whatever you pick about, whether it's been manufactured in India, in Europe, South Africa, the main components, they are being made there in China. They are being imported from there. So we are effectively giving them the power to rule the world. And but that gives us a lesson. It goes way back to, you take yourself 25 years back. China was nothing, but they realized their power. It was the people. All they had was huge population. So their government decided to invest and use those people to develop processes and manufacture things, and they slowly have are now dominating it. Nobody else, even if we try and do that, because they've scaled it too much, because they've narrowed down the technology, nobody is able to meet the prices that they are able to offer. So it is kind of fascinating. So if we want China to put a break, the entire world need to get together and slowly move the manufacturing out of China, so that, because the leadership of China is of a dictatorship mentality, and they're not serving uh, to make the world better. They are joining hands with Pakistan. They are joining hands with any terrorist body. You will find them linking with them to take control over the world, which is never good. If the world needs to be a place where peace is maintained, the countries which are getting stuff from China, yes, you may have to spend a little more to get it from elsewhere. There are a lot of other countries. India is there, Bangladesh is there, Nepal is there. There are various other countries wherein you can still get the products. It may not be as cheap as that in China, but it would still be cheap than what you are producing in your own country, because the labor here is cheap. So for me, I see it as an opportunity, at least for us, the Indians, to get into the manufacturing world and seize the opportunity, because it is there. A lot of countries are deciding not to do business with China, but because they don't have the resources, they don't know where to go. They end up reaching China for all the raw material.
Yeah. Thanks, Ish. Yeah, I think it is interesting how they've grown so rapidly and accelerated that economy so rapidly in what's a very short space of time. So, Frank, how do you say Glasgow in Mandarin?
Glasgow. I have no idea. Listen, China, when we talk about China, I think what we've done so far in the conversation is talk about China, the country, the entity, the nation. But I think of China as the individual Chinese people, the people like the Frank Shapiros of China, who I don't know how you say that in Mandarin either. But the ordinary person in the street just getting on with their life, not knowing anything about maybe what some of the outside world thinks of them. As the spying idea, or the people who can't be trusted, or whatever it might be. I don't tend to think of that. I know that we talk about, Chinese companies might be spying on the UK and the USA and South Africa and all that kind of stuff, but we're doing the same thing. The UK are doing the same thing to China. And I don't think we can sit back and say we're right and they're wrong. Horrendous things are happening in China and places like China. There's no doubt about it as far as human rights are concerned. But for the ordinary man in the street, I think the China man, China woman, China child are just trying to get through life, the same as we are, no different from us. I like Ish, think there's huge opportunity. And I know some people don't want to work with China. I know some big companies don't want to work with China. I know some governments don't want to work with China. If you don't work with your enemies, then they just become more of your enemies. So I'm one for working cautiously with people who I maybe don't trust 100%, but not just shutting them out, because then you don't know what they're doing. When I was a boy in my teens, I suppose, quite a few years ago, when you looked at the bottom of something and it said made in China, it was like cheap and nasty and it would break easily. Nowadays, when you see made in China, they are way ahead of us in technology. You know, I remember listening to people talking about 5G when we were still on 2 or 3G over here, and not very good 2 or 3G over here. So I would say that although we think that China as a country is a secretive place, I think most of us in other countries are quite secretive as well. I don't think we can just put that down to China. We do have some fundamental philosophical differences in how the world and how our countries should be run. But the ordinary, just, you know, if you take nothing away from what I'm saying here, is I would say, don't look at all Chinese people or that part of the world people as different from you and I, because 99.9% of them are exactly the same as you and I. And I'm still confused at what's that word, petaflop means after the 2 explanations that we heard. I have no idea. So maybe not just now, but at the end, maybe somebody can tell me what it is, because I love words of the day, and I'm going to use that one if I understand what the heck it means.
It basically is how to process bloody great big numbers.
Yeah, that's an indication of processing speed. Yeah.
Put it in a sentence, just very quickly. Put it in one sentence for me. Okay.
Yeah.
Think about it and put it in the chat.
Good. All right. So, Jasper, how are your petaflops this morning? Can you say that in Mandarin?
Morning. I can't even say it in English. This is where my little mind just clutch out. Too much overload there. Yes. No, I think all I have is call it the observer's view of China. So I'll just give you my observer's view of China. And I had the privilege of actually visiting it once when we went to Hong Kong. We took a day trip into one of the neighboring towns. And it was, I think, like Frank said, it's just, you know, people are people all over the world. And they want the same for their families, and their needs and likes are the same. And I think the macro things that we are observing on this platform is more due to a kind of totalitarian system, but one that is somehow run with the interest of the country at heart, and not just the greed of a few politicians, scheming the money of the country for their own wealth. And it's amazing what they achieve. And I think, Japan has got that same culture. So it's maybe not just pertaining to China, it's more an Asian culture. And an Asian culture, it's about thinking that we are co-responsible for our society. And I believe, and I don't know if it's China or Japan or the Asian education system, but a large part of the early education of a child is in training him how to have values and how to respect elders and where he fits into the economy. So it creates a different kind of person than, in the Western, where our youth has this entitlement mentality, and if you don't give it to me, I'll destroy and break and do stuff. So I think culture has a huge effect. And then also they are certainly thinking long term, because in my research for my book on legacy, I was amazed to see that most of the strong families around the world reside in Asia, China, Japan, places like that. And they have a focused culture of continuing the family name, even to the point that if I'm now that current strong financial family in the community, but I only have daughters, I then adopt my sons-in-law and they take on my name so that the family name can continue. And there are some of these strong families that are now still 700 years later, still the same family business. Obviously, they've extended and expanded, but you can trace back the story of that family 700 years. Now, that's massive. I mean, our whole country, South Africa, doesn't have a history going further than 400 years. So there are individual families with that kind of thing. So I think it's a combination of thinking long term, and because they're patient, they know where they want to. I've traveled extensively in Africa, and there's not a place in Africa that I visited that has not been impacted by China. And they are very clever. They come in, they play on the greed of the politicians. They lend money easily for infrastructure, but then they own and control the infrastructure, like roads, like railways, like the main economic infrastructure. And then they go for the resources like the copper, and they get the raw materials. And because they've got a long-term strategy, they know then how to add value to it. So I think if I have to describe them almost in one word, without making it a big issue, they are just initially slow, but the pace is accelerating. They are colonizing the planet economically, and that's how they create futures and opportunities for their people, because in all the projects that they then tackle, they bring in their own people from China, and they slowly but surely penetrating the world. And in all the places that I traveled, another interesting thing is almost every big city has a section that is called Chinatown. And I love Chinese food, and I love to, when I travel, to go and visit these things because I find it interesting. But the culture is more or less the same. So and nobody really objects, because that adds value to that country. And even here in South Africa, in Joburg, we've got a Chinatown. So I can give that to them. And then what I found interesting, I was following the whole world of cryptocurrency quite intensely a while back, because I know that the underlying motivation for cryptocurrency is we want to get out of the hands of our politicians, and we don't want to be controlled. We want to take control back and trade with whoever we want to trade. So that's the underlying motivation. Well, China, a couple of months or years ago, not years, in this last 12 months, was announced that they've now created a national cryptocurrency. It's one-to-one with the yuan. They now pay their state workers, all the municipality and state workers are now being paid in cryptocurrency, which is freely exchanged by the banks back into fiat currency if they want to. And then the other big thing is, for years and years, the dollar was the trading currency for the world, and that's what basically still props it up. But quietly in the background, China has been buying up gold at a rate of knots. And you can see most of even in the various countries, people who then say, we'll buy your gold, and they'll buy jewelry and all sorts of stuff, but they do it for the gold so that they can back up their economy with gold. So they're probably the largest keepers of gold right now. And then their yuan was only now in the last 12 months, was it announced by the big world powers to be recognized as another world currency that we can now trade between countries as that. So as soon as that thing gains momentum and it's backed by the right economy and gold, watch what's going to happen to the dollar. So I think I've had the pleasure of meeting and knowing a few Chinese people here in South Africa, and they really stand out in terms of their work ethics and how they also put pressure. Well, you can feel sorry for the kid in a certain way, because that's a lot of pressure on the kid to perform academically and perform in sports and stuff like that. But then the results are there. So they've got a high, that kind of work ethic. But then on another note, probably not once it gets to business, I think anything goes. And it was amazing for me to see how they, 6 months before the actual thing would be released by a Nike or a Rolex or whatever, the fake was already available on the streets of China. So they're also masters on fake. But yeah, so I think that's just my observations from a distance. And I think we can certainly learn from them. I like Anta Kalipa, I don't know, I know it's not your name, but that's the name I see on the screen. I'm also concerned for a totalitarian system, but it doesn't matter whether it's China or anyone. I don't want to be in a totalitarian system. Unfortunately, that's where the world is heading. So I think we can even learn from people in China. How do they then cope? Because I'm sure that they have their quiet subgroups that find ways to still continue with what they have to do, and on the surface comply with all the regulations and stuff, but under the surface probably still maintain their independence and stuff. So that would be another topic for another day. Thanks, Ivan.
Great, thanks, Jasper. Yeah, nice to get an African perspective as well. So from what you've seen around Africa, which is great. So Trevor, yeah, your thoughts?
This topic is far too deep for me. I've got Chinese neighbors, and I must tell you, the communication is extremely difficult, but we sometimes swap pet ducks and chickens and all of those sort of things. Listening to all of you, I did put a link there from the BBC for Ed and Frank to go and have a look at. I'm just amazed at how these folk came in the last 30 years, something similar to what happened in Dubai, to completely changing the outward look of their people and their plight, to starting to think about growing what I think are almost in capitalist terms. That I think they cottoned on to the fact that this whole world is about resource and money, and that it takes money to make money, and that out of their communist system and Chairman Mao somehow in the last 30 years sprang this economy that could grow a London every year. And then I think somewhere we put a link, and Ivan, you might have that link somewhere, of the roads that they were actually building. And it becomes extremely difficult for me to criticize individuals who, if we break apart the positives from the negatives and analyze what is it that they are doing well and why, and I fully understand all the human rights issues and all of those negatives. But there is something in me that turns around and says, I don't buy into any individual, no matter how great they are, no matter how big the story is. There are good points in every single individual, and there are bad points in every single individual. So for me, my advice is people role model the good and dispense with the bad. So how do we role model the good that is coming out of China right now in the way that they are growing their economy, they're adding value to their people's lives? Well, are they? I don't know. Who gives us that accurate information? And Frank used a word which I think almost describes the Chinese economy. It's still based on being secretive. And for us in South Africa, we came out of the most degrading, secretive economic and political structure ever. I mean, it's still the pariah history of the world, this apartheid system. But you know, what are their negatives? If they are being secretive, what is their agenda? And are we overthinking their agenda? Jasper brought up, maybe they're going to take over the world and the world's going to be totalitarian, as he said, and we've got to find a way to become Jack Ma's within a totalitarian world economy. I mean, here he is, one of the world's most successful technological billionaires come out of this environment. And I don't think there's too much different about what China is doing, and Ish, forgive me when I say this, and what India is doing. I think these two countries are just leading lights in the world. And we've got to look into the good and try and put the bad one side. And Ed, the one thing that concerns me all the time when I look at these totalitarian states, I really struggle with that, is when they have marching armies of hundreds of thousands of people that remind me of Hitler and Germany, and they're all in lockstep. I ask myself, why are they doing this? What is it all for? And how many millions have they actually got? But do I spend sleepless nights on that, or do I focus on the good? Those are the things that go through my mind. I just want to know how we in South Africa can build roads in the next 10 years, let alone major super highways in every year. Ivan, you've got those numbers, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, look at that. I think it is fascinating, and I mean the speed of the rollout of what they're doing is mind-boggling. I think it's 6,000 miles of new road highway every year that they're actually laying down, and they put down more highways and road infrastructure in the last 10 years than the rest of the world combined. You know, I mean, the numbers are just mind-boggling, and you know, the speed with which they're rolling this sort of stuff out. So I think there are significant lessons to be learned if you look at what they're doing. You know, not that I want to see the entire world sort of under superhighway by any stretch of the imagination. You know, but Ed made an interesting comment. They one of the leaders in climate change. You know, so. And I mean, they had massive problems. I mean, you know, the cities that were under smog and pollution and so on. And we know, I mean, face masks were a thing in China cities for many years before the pandemic, and that's just simply because of the air pollution. You know, and places in Europe are now facing those exact same problems. I mean, I've seen pictures of Paris which are shocking. You know, and so on. So you know, if they are now developing the kinds of technologies and abilities to clean that all up and make that right, we've got to learn from that. You know, we've got to take those lessons and see what we can do. And then the other thing that amazes me, and we've chatted briefly about it on this forum before, is, you know, where does the money come from that's allowed them to do this, and why can't other countries do exactly the same thing? You know, people talk about if you print money, you create inflation and blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? China's been printing money for 15, 20, 30 years, and they've had the fastest growing GDP in the world for the last 15, 20 years. You know, the inflation hasn't spiraled out of control. They've basically taken over the world. They've put the world in debt to them. I mean, that little thing I put up about, you know, Angola there in the chat box, you know, it's quite scary. I mean, I haven't been there personally myself to Luanda, but my business partner was there a few times, and he says, you know, it's quite scary. Firstly, the cost of actually going to visit Luanda. I mean, you're looking at a relatively ordinary hotel at $400 a night, you know, and this is effectively a poverty-stricken African country. You know, it's and he says, you know, you go into the city, and one side of the city is all this magnificent infrastructure that the Chinese have built, but guess what? It's all standing empty. And now the you know, the Angolan government owes them, what is it, $20 billion, you know, for the stuff that they've built there, but nobody can afford to rent it because it's too expensive. So you've got these sort of you know, contrasts in what's actually going on there, and but I think the thing that fascinates me, and I haven't disappeared down the rabbit hole like Ed did yet, but I probably will, is to actually work out how they've done this from essentially a communist economy. You know, they have created capitalism within communism. I mean, if you just look at that documentary of Shenzhen City, I mean, that thing blew my mind. I mean, I don't know if you guys have actually watched that. It's, you know, 40 years ago, Shenzhen, just on the border of Hong Kong inside China, was an 80,000 population, primarily rural environment. Today, it is the most sophisticated super mega city in the world. It has over 11 million population. It's entirely automated. It's a cashless society. Shops are unmanned. You go into a shop, at the door there's facial recognition that lets you into the shop. You go around, collect whatever you want from the shop. You go into the back room there, you, again, facial recognition, you pay with an app on your smartphone, and you walk out. You don't actually connect with a shop assistant. You know, Tabisa, can you imagine that in Sandton City? You know, I mean, you go to a restaurant, you sit down, there's a tablet built into the tabletop. You order your food off the tablet, and it comes down a chute and lands in front of you. You know, there's no server. Now, these maybe aren't good things, maybe they are good things, you know, but the thing that boggles my mind is how they've achieved that in such a short space of time, in essentially what is supposed to be a lockdown communist country and economy. And you look at the people walking around on their streets there, they would fit into London, into New York, into Paris. You know, the way they dress, the way they're behaving, you know, the way they're eating. I mean, Frank spoke about, you know, the average Chinese person. I mean, have a look at the average Chinese person in Shenzhen City. They're well-off people, and they're doing extremely well. And they're wearing, you know, the Nike shoes and carrying the Apple, you know, phones and all sorts of those things. So, you know, here again, we've got this contrast of a perception of a communist environment, but you know, as Joe said, and they're building a London every year, basically, you know, inside that country. It's mind-boggling what they're achieving. And the rest of the world is sitting back and slating them rather than learning from them. And I think that's where we're making the big mistake. So I agree 100% with Trevor. You know, we've got to find ways of taking what's really good out of that environment and implementing it in the rest of the world. Otherwise, we are going to just get taken over and left behind. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
I don't really want to start a discussion at this time, but the thing about that is that that wouldn't fly in the UK or USA, because too many people would say, Big Brother, I don't want them face recognition when you go into a shop or whatever. So I don't see, it's a different mentality. Over there, it's almost like, this is what you're doing. Over here, it's like, we're not doing this. So it's a real dilemma, an exciting one, but a real dilemma.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
In London, we do have a store where you walk in, you take the goods, and you walk out without anything. They opened the Amazon store a little while ago in London, so it's happening here, Frank. Yeah. And the young people love it. They love that store.
Yeah, but the thing is, you'll get people who just won't visit that store because I mean, in this country, you know, Ed, there's a lot of people who won't carry the tracking traits app because of Big Brother, you know, so they're not going to go into a store. Whereas over there, probably, I'm guessing these numbers, but over there, probably 99% or 95% will use it because that's what they do. Over here, probably 80% won't use it because of the Big Brother effect, and that's just, you know, there's an inbuilt interest, is that what, untrust, where people don't trust these things over here, but maybe over there they do. They've been brought up with it, and I think when my generation disappears, I think those things might start to come in, because young people just know what it's all about.
Yeah, look, it's a fascinating. So yes, Trevor, yeah.
Now, just for Frank, I'm just going to suggest, how many people use Facebook? You think Big Brother's not involved there? Listen, these things.
Yeah.
Before we get too far down that line, could I suggest a subject for tomorrow?
That's exactly what I was going to ask. Thanks, Ed. Yeah.
Frank raised.
Well, tomorrow probably not, but Monday.
Monday. I mean, and Frank raised a really interesting point about the difference between China and the people. And I think it's almost the same with every country, isn't it? And Frank, forgive me for this, but you know, the Scots have a sort of reputation of being mean, but they aren't. You know, they really aren't. And the British have a reputation for being, well, the English, stiff upper lip. The Americans for being brash. You know, so I wondered whether we could look at why we have this difference between the perception of the country and the people. Would that be a flyer?
Yeah.
And I wanted to add to that. I threw in the little topic of stereotyping, because I think I do it all the time. And I wondered just how much stereotyping we still all do, even though we know and we're told we shouldn't be doing it. And I think that's what you're touching on here, Edward.
All right, good. So again, practice your typing in stereo, and we'll see how we can discuss that topic on Monday morning. But other than that, have a fantastic weekend, folks. Enjoy it. You can join us on the YP session today at 12. There's also the chamber session at 10 a.m. So if you'd like to pop into those, you're more than welcome. So other than that,
hang on a moment.
That's 11, Frank, at our time.
Chamber session at what time?
10 a.m. my time, 9 a.m. UK time, and the YP session 12 p.m. my time, 11 a.m. UK time.
Just correction there, Ivan. We're starting now at 9, not
8. You're quite right, but thanks. I'm glad you're awake.
I'm confused. I tell you, my Chinese watcher.
I tell you what, these time zone things are throwing all of us. Okay, so my apologies.
You haven't even got time zones in South Africa, and you got confused with your own South African meetings.
Exactly.
Well, it's all you people who mess around with the time around the world that confuse me. So yeah, quite right. So 15 minutes we're up on the chamber. That link, if you don't have it, let me grab it for you very quickly, because that is a different link. I'm
off to Newquay at 8 o'clock our time.
Yeah. Okay, no problem. And
I'm off for breakfast at 8 o'clock our time.
Good.
Is that a full Scottish?
No, I'm one of those. It doesn't look like it, but I'm one of those brand people in the morning.
Ooh, no.
There you go. Okay, so that's the chamber link, the YP link. You just have to hop onto yourpartnerships.co.uk and register. But hopefully we'll see you there. Otherwise, we'll see you Monday. Have a good one. Cheers.
Bye.
Later.
That's